Randy, welcome.
Kory, it's great to be here. Always fun to talk to you.
Randy, when I think about you, the words that come to mind are humility, wisdom, and generosity. You grew up in Canton, Ohio. Can you say a little about your background, who your parents were?
Well, thank you. First of all, what a nice way to start a discussion for someone to assign those three words to you. It's very gracious of you to say that. Being born in Canton, Ohio just makes you humble. It's kind of a blue collar town.
You're a Browns fan, so I didn't say smart.
Yeah. being a Browns fan, if that does not humble you, nothing will. But no, I grew up there. It was a blue collar town, about 100,000 people. It was like a town that had its day, but that day was ending when I was born. The Rust Belt, Northeast Ohio, steelworker. My dad was a steelworker, and he was born there, and my mom was born there, and so yeah, that's where I was born. They got married very young, ridiculously young, but it was normal at the time. In the 50s, people got married when they were 20, and that's when my mom and dad got married. They realized 2 years in that was probably a mistake and ended the marriage, but thankfully long enough to have me. So I'm grateful for that. How the how the qualities got instilled, I give my dad a lot of credit. My dad, if I had to think of a word for him, decency would be the first word I think, and dependability. He was the guy who promised something, he did it. He went to work every day. We came home every night. Joe Lunchbucket, reliable, dependable, good guy, laughed easily. Very religious, traditional kind of Protestant, Midwest religious background. And I was actually raised more with him than my mom. I lived with my dad and my stepmother. My mom moved to the East Coast, and for a lot of years, I stayed in contact with her, but then we lost touch for about 10 years, from 8 to 18. We reunited when I graduated high school. And so I think kind of the basics of humility and decency, whatever I got, I tend to credit my dad for that. He took care of me every day. He did the hard things, as did my stepmother. And then my mom re-entered my life at a time when I was ready for something different. And I'm grateful because she showed me a whole different way to kind of take the next stage of my life that I wouldn't have gotten had she not re-entered.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. Randy, I don't think we ever connected the dots, but we share that my parents separated when I was 5. We both grew up without the picturesque family, so to speak. That even goes more to your humility about the forgiveness and the willing to reconcile or pick things up with mom. It's still a ripe age. I think that speaks a lot to the characteristics your dad instilled in you.
We're all partly products of our time. Today in modern parenting, you find people get divorced and they tend to be much more civil about it. They make arrangements to take care of the kids, they share time. Back when my parents got divorced, it was the old fashioned way. They fought and didn't like each other. So, what I learned ever since then was to value what each one, they were young, they did what they could. And my dad did what he could for me. My mom needed to do what she had to do to move and forge a new life. And then she never wanted that separation that we had. She she desperately hated it, but it happened. And then she fought hard to reunite. And I remember getting a letter from her, the what 2 weeks after I graduated high school, and I wasn't going to go to college. And she, at the time, she just said, let's get together again. And long and short of it, after getting together again, it was wonderful. Enjoyed it. But she said to me that summer, you got to go to college. I was a good student in high school. I was ill informed and I didn't understand. No one in my family had ever gone to college. So I didn't use my resources. I was ignorant. And she helped me see that there was a way to get there and pushed me to go. And as a result, I give my dad a lot of credit for raising me and instilling fundamentals in me. Give my mom a lot of credit just in time for making sure that my life got on a better future trajectory. And so I just choose to be grateful for what each one did rather than what they weren't. I'm sure you've done the same.
It forces you to grow up a little faster. Randy, one of the things I've always appreciated about our relationship is we've known each other 11 years now since Butler connected us. We never have any small talk. I hate small talk in general with anybody. It pains me, but particularly with someone as experienced and wise as you, it'd be sort of a waste of time with all of the next level conversations that you and I always have the pleasure of having.
Yeah, we
So,
have some good ones, Corey. And I and I would also like to say that the perspective I just shared with you is perspective of a guy who's lived a while and had time to think about it. I wish I would have been, as forgiving and understanding of both parents when I was 22 as I am, when I hit 62. But time does that for you, and that's one of the things I've gained to appreciate and focus on um, what life gave me from all individuals, including both parents, including two great step parents, right? Who my stepmother gave me a great deal of. I mean, wasn't fun for her when I went through my teens, I'm sure, but she was there, and wasn't fun when I rejected my stepfather when he first entered my life. It didn't, was made life hard for him, but he was there to help me through college and really instrumental in helping me launch my career because he was in the world of business. You probably would say the same, but we learn over time to appreciate things with the lens of history.
Randy, transitioning into your career, I sort of bucket your career into two separate conversations. You have your corporate career, and then you have your life after corporate career, which is where you and I connected at Butler University in Indianapolis in the MBA program. Let's start with the corporate career. You've had quite an accomplished corporate career, ranging from, small commercial companies up to very, very large commercial companies. And one of the things I wanted to start with is how do you establish trust and credibility? And I'm going to ask it in the lens of, not when you're in your executive leadership role as chief human resource officer at Anthem, but you shared this story with me 10 years ago, and it stuck with me ever since when I was in the same boat when you were 26 and your boss had quit and there was an opening and you raised your hand. Can you tell that story
Yeah.
and how you build trust and credibility on the back of that?
Yeah, I will. The main way, especially early in your career, to build trust and credibility is do what you say you're going to do and be authentic, be real. When I first started working, it was with hourly employees. If you try and do bullshit with hourly people, they won't give you corporate speak. They'll call you on it. And so I think being down in the trenches early on, working with all kinds of employees helped me understand the importance of just doing what you say you're going to do and being an authentic person. Long about 26, my 44-year-old boss quit, and I was his number two, and I had learned under him for a couple years, and I knew I could do his job, and I wanted to do his job. By 26, my college habits were finally over, and I was getting serious about career and wanted to advance. So I went into his boss, the director, and I said, "Hey, Don, I can do Ed's job, and I'd love you to give me a shot at doing it." But I knew what the barriers were, and I knew the barrier was it was too high a level jump. It was too high a status jump, and just it wasn't done. So I said, "How about this? Just give me a shot at doing the job, and you don't need to give me his title or his pay. I just want to prove to you that I can do it." And he thought about it for a while, and he said, "Okay, I'll give you the job, and I'm not going to give you his title or his pay. So be careful what you ask for. They may do it." And so, but he did give me what I needed. He gave me a shot to get into a job that at 26 I never would have gotten had I not taken those barriers out of the way. Right. And so a year later, he said, "You're right. You proved you could do it." And those things followed. So there was a leap of faith that basically I had to trust him that if I did my job as I promised I would, he would properly reward me, and he did. And I think the point of that was I learned at that point, ask for what you want, go for things, don't wait to be tapped on the head because that's not the way to advance in your career. If you want something, you need to let it be known that you do and do it in the most sincere, authentic, and professional way you can. You were right. You could do the job. And those things I didn't give you at the beginning, I'm giving you now. I'm giving you the title, I'm giving you the money. And so that what that reinforced to me was when you see something you want, but there are barriers, be smart about it. Try and remove the barriers so that it's easy for someone to give you your chance, but by all means ask for it because, people can't read your mind. And if you wait around to be tapped, it's usually a bad strategy. You should raise your hand and say, "Hey coach, put me in."
Are you actually confident you can do his job, or you were gonna figure out how to
Well,
make
truth
it up?
Truthfully, I had been his understudy for 2 years, and I really did I watched what he did, I saw what he did, I learned from it, he let me do a lot. So, credit to him, the reason I could do his job at 26 was he had let me shadow him, learn from him, and, I learned then, what kind of by watching him, I learned what kind of boss I wanted to be too, the developmental boss.
Randy, we're going to jump around a little bit in your career, but just so we understand big picture arc of it, the story you're describing now is that an RCA?
RCA.
And RCA gets acquired.
RCA got first acquired by GE, and that was a huge win for me because at the time GE was voted, literally ranked in Forbes and the most admired company in the world. Those were the Jack Welch days when GE could do no wrong, and they also were cutting edge in the profession I was in, HR. They basically said, "Look, HR needs to be a business function. You have to understand the business. You have to add value. You have to contribute. You can't be some administrative weenie. You have to actually, integrate your work with what we're trying to do to drive results for the company." And I think getting the opportunity to have that instilled at me at 27 when that happened was career changing. And so I remember the older people hated that GE was acquiring us, right? The old RCA guard was like, oh my God, because their jobs were in jeopardy. But those of us in our 20s, we were looking at it and saying, this could be cool. And for me, it was extremely cool. Now, they did not want my division because we made televisions. Jack Welch wanted the NBC, he wanted the defense business, he wanted the money making units. And within 4 years, he sold my division. That's okay. 4 years, I got what I needed, and I was able to take that with me.
What level were you at the time when you were working under Jack Welch's GE?
Front level management, first line manager, not anything, not even middle manager, right? And then during the GE period, I was promoted to a role that gave me a lot of visibility to senior people, that allowed me to contribute to a business unit that had a lot of visibility. And so there again, there's luck in career. I mean, there's skill and there's luck. And so being lucky to be acquired by GE, being given an opportunity to be in a visible role where I could show senior people what I could do, just not to play up or play a game, but just to do my job well and get seen. That happened, at a really critical time in my career in my late 20s, early 30s. But I was still pretty low on the totem pole.
Did you have any direct experience or actions with Jack Welch?
Yeah, I did. And it was because I was low on the totem pole. He had this habit of coming around and wanting to, he called them skip level lunches. And so he would say to each function head, manufacturing, marketing, sales, legal, HR, send me one of your young, they called them high potentials at the time. They got to be probably under 30 and I want to have lunch with them all. And I wanted them to ask me questions. So I got to go to that question, and I had lunch with Welsh and about 10 other newbies like me. He let us ask questions, and my question was because I knew our division was outside what he called his 3 circles, meaning, we're the unwanted part of the acquisition. We all knew it. He was very clear. That was very clear. You knew where you stood with Welsh as a unit and as a person. And so when it was question time, I raised my hand and I said, "How long do we have to get inside one of the circles?" And he said 15 months. He didn't hedge, he didn't anything. Then 7 months later he sold us.
Yeah. Uh, and and so the days, sort of what he's notorious for, I don't know if it's the Jack Welch bell curve or the GE way of firing the bottom percent each year. You sort of lived through that, whether by acquisition or sale. But do you think that's stuck with you as you continued on in your career, and eventually on to Anthem, where you sort of hit your peak? Did you have that mindset with you? You're an interesting dynamic because you're end up being an HR executive in charge of all the people and ultimately the ones having to make the call of, who's losing their job this year. And so to me, it's sort of two things need to be true at the same time. You have to demand a level of excellence and performance, but you're also dealing with people, not robots and numbers. So can you say a little bit how that ultimately shaped your leadership philosophy as you moved on from G?
Yeah, I love that question, Corey, because people ask a lot, what did you think about in the light of history, the GE way that Jack Welch espoused sounds cold and brutal. Neutron Jack kept the buildings, but left them empty of people. He did lose a lot of people. Not every method that was employed at the time was probably right. But here's what I got from it, and here's what I took from it. It's the both and. It's exactly what you said. To be a viable enterprise, you have to adapt and change and grow. And so you just can't be part of a big company that's doing well and ride for free. You got to contribute. And so I liked the notion of force ranking groups and saying, look, if you're in the bottom 10%, you're vulnerable. And that's life. That's real life. That happens in all kinds of ways. It's just that I think GE was more candid about it. And as a result, I thought that the notion of always having to up my game, never letting the status quo be good enough, not being entitled to a job or a future anywhere was part of life. And so I didn't have any false notion about the competitive landscape of the world. And I knew I had to keep getting better myself. Now, when I had to make sure those kind of things got implemented, then it's all a question of how you do it. And I think to the extent I always thought it was easier to terminate someone who performed badly than to lay someone off who was just part of a unit that didn't perform well and maybe was good. So I think I was always more sensitive to layoffs than I was to terminations. You handle both with dignity, you handle both with humanity. There's no need to be brutal about it. And I always wanted to be the person who orchestrated the way it was done if it had to be done, so it was done well. And so I think you take care of people, you give them bridges, you give them transition help when they've performed well, and they just happened to be part of a business unit that just didn't cut it or wasn't part of your company's future anymore. And having been sold twice in my 20s, I got what it felt like to be sold, right? No one called me and said, "Do you want your company to be acquired by someone else?" You just woke up, went into work, and that was the new reality. So I think I was glad that I got acquired twice as a young person, so that when I did acquisitions later in my life and in my career, I think, more aware of how you felt when it happened.
So I have some more questions, but I'd like to move the timeline to when you get to Anthem. So Jack sells your division. You didn't make it in the circle. He
Right?
sells you. That's sold to a company called Thompson,
Correct.
and then from Thompson, you're continuing in the HR business partner, and then eventually, I think you're in your early 40s at this point. You go over to Anthem.
Correct. Yeah. The Thompson period was 11 years. It was still the same consumer electronics kind of crummy, low margin industry, but it was a global company. It was based in Paris, and that's when I got to advance and become a VP level person, work for a boss in Paris, have responsibility in Mexico, Brazil, outside the US, and got to grow my job. And I had grown as far as I could at Thompson. I was the VP of what they call the Americas region, about 25,000 people. And I was at a point in my career where I thought, "Uh-oh, I'm not the leadership of the company. We're all French. There was French government ownership. There was nowhere else to go, and I was 40, and so I had to think, what's next?" And that's when I got the call from the recruiter about Anthem and their need for a chief HR officer.
So you go into Anthem as chief CHRO. Okay.
And, after 3 months of interviewing, after 15 interviews, including with a shrink, and it was the most rigorous interview process I had ever had, and I respected him for that because, it was a plum job and, they should have been selective.
Randy, you've mentioned this concept to me a while ago, but now you're in your leadership role at Anthem. Can you explain excellence versus perfection?
We did some work on culture at Anthem, because we were always merging. And if you get culture creates tension in mergers. We wanted to be more intentional about what the type of culture we were trying to espouse and live out, the type that would drive success. One of the things we learned was that if you always went for perfection, and that last 10% to go from excellence to perfection was often a lot of wasted time and energy and was pointless. And so the notion of really striving for excellence was the goal and should be the goal, and that the extra 10% you try and go toward perfection is usually not that productive, and you should move on to the next thing and try and be excellent at that. So it's a hard thing. because we all want to nail it. We want to get the 10 on the balance beam, right? When you perform at a 9.7 and you beat the competition and you take care of your customers, you have to forgive yourself for a few things that didn't quite go right, and you try and learn from those.
To really enter Anthem at a growth era, you oversaw over 10 acquisitions, 15,000 employees to 45,000 employees, and climbing up the Fortune 500 list to top 50 or so.
Yeah, we were in the top 50. I think our when I left, we were like 32 by revenue.
The employees multiplying the revenue at that time, you were 70 billion. With that level of growth, and you're in charge of the people at the top and reporting directly to the CEO, how do you keep the culture from getting watered down and essentially just becoming an entirely new culture because the people that were here, all of a sudden you've multiplied and these weren't the people that were here from the start? What's the biggest people challenge when you experience that level of growth?
Excellent questions, all. And I think there are three ways about nurturing and shaping a culture. Number one, you have to be intentional about it. You have to make it a priority. I mean, you say, well, what do you mean? That's so amorphous, right? But no, culture, we defined it as the way we do things, right? So, every family has a culture, every business has a culture, every team has a culture, and it's their collective habits. It's what they do over and over again. It's behavior. So you can see it, right? It's not something you can't, it's not words on a wall, it's day to day behavior. So, first, know that how we show up every day is the culture that we're living out. The second thing is if we want to be intentional about it, well, how do we want to behave, right? How do we want to be when we show up? How do we want to make decisions? How do we want to engage? How do we want to deal with each other? And then once we do that, then the third thing is we have to live it. We can if the CEO up to the CEO, if the CEO does not buy into the culture you're trying to shape, no one else is going to believe it. So you have to understand what culture is, that it's behavior, it's habits. It's number two, you have to be intentional about what those habits you want are, and then you have to live them. And living them not means not just you, but you have to promote people who espouse those things. You can't promote the jerk who does not treat customers and employees the way they should be treated just because they're excellent at a functional skill. So it takes discipline to manage and keep a culture the way you want it to. And then to your point, as you grow, you have to reinforce that by intentionally telling people as part of the integration process, this is who we are. This is how we want to lead our company, and this is how we want to be.
Randy, I always cracked up when you would say this about culture and leadership. All these people, and you're hiring different functions. You've got job descriptions. You had this saying, we hired an accountant and oops, a whole person showed up. The metaphor there is you're managing and leading people, not positions. And but that must be hard when you've got jobs to fill and roles to do, and you need to fill those positions from a top down perspective. How do you lead, with those kind of ethos or morals that we're going to take care of the whole person? It's one thing at a family business or a small company. It's another at a Fortune, 50 company.
I'm going to credit the first CEO I had at Anthem for teaching me how to address that question. His name was Larry Glasscock. He was first of seven children in his family, first one to go to college. Came from kind of like me, humbler beginnings, and what and he rose to become a CEO of a Fortune 30 company and worked hard at it, did all the hard things, performed at a high level. But the thing about him is he never forgot the humanity of being a person, a real person. As an example, um, he would walk the floors. The first thing he did when he went to a company that we acquired was just walk around and say hello to people. He would write people thank you notes, handwritten thank you notes. We would have a voicemail message from him to all 50,000, 45,000 people, he would record it 9 times to make it sound like, I mean, one time I said after time number 8, "I think you got it, Larry." And he goes, "No, there's the part I really think I want to try again." And you could say, "Well, isn't that perfection versus excellence?" A little bit, maybe. But the truth is, he was trying to sound like a real person talking to every one of those people. So I think the way you keep the humanity in a very large company is you remember that companies are made up of human beings. And to the extent you want to talk about performance and goals and objectives, you must, and that's part of respecting human beings, making sure they know what's expected. But another part is making sure that you realize they have lives outside of work and that they want something from it for them and for their families. They want growth, they want financial security, they want a future. And so it's the both and of that. My job was to remind all my colleagues that it was the both and, right? That we had to perform, and I knew it, and we were going to be a productive labor force, but we were always also going to be a labor force that people wanted to be part of because there was growth, there was enjoyment from being at work, there was ways that people got fulfilled. It was the both and. You said it.
Managing the whole person outside of work. I hope you don't find this to be too personal of a question. How did you live that? The pressure, the responsibility of growing this company, publicly traded, you're in the C suite. How did you live those values that you preached? And were you present enough as a father during those years where it was, all hands on deck? And the concept work life balance to me has never been a thing. It's more like work life integration, and one has to integrate with the other. You have a bad day at home, you have a bad day at work, and vice versa. How did you handle the pressure, but also wanting to be there for your family?
Such an important question, especially to a young dad like you, who's like right in the middle of running a company and trying to be a good husband and a good dad and all that, and a good son, maybe everything. The number of roles we play in life is amazing, right? Just write it down and think about it. It boiled down to this for me, and I think this will resonate with you. I'm curious to what you think. I was never good at work life balance. I was good, but I was good at prioritization. So I knew that, no matter what day it was, the most important people to me were Libby, Natalie, and Pete, my wife, my son, and my daughter. And I always knew that, and there was no compromise in that. They were the most important. On any given day, they may not have felt like they were the most important people based on a necessity, but they always knew that when it mattered most, that they were. And I reinforced it through, the love I tried to share and show them, the time we spent together, the things that we didn't cancel because it was vacation time or something like that. The events in their life that I, made sure I attended. And I think the notion was not to try and create some mythical balance that every day should be divided up 70, 20, 10 or something, but to let them know and to keep in mind that they matter most and that each day something may have to shift because of the requirements of that day. So I'll give you an example. My mom has a heart attack and she's in Mexico, and I'm still the chief HR officer at Anthem, and I'm still the husband to Libby and the dad to Natalie and Pete. I had to get on a plane that day and go to Mexico and be with my mom because that day, that moment, I needed to be a son, right? And she needed that. She needed me to perform in that role. So to me, it's the idea that you keep your priorities, you flex based on the demands. And when we were doing a company, buying a company, there were times when Libby didn't see me very much, right? Because we had to get the deal done, and then we had to do some other things. But I think when your family knows that they're your priority and they know it by how you treat them and love them and spend time with them, they'll give you grace when you have to spend your time elsewhere. That's what I found, and I'm also lucky to have wonderful family who tolerates some of that stuff.
What you mentioned there just reminded me, one of the first exercises we ever did together is you told me to take out a pen and paper and write down all the roles that I play. That was a valuable exercise then. It would be 10x that now. That's a reminder. It's something we should all do. And I'm in a much different place in life 10 years later than I was when you and I first met on campus. And so I think this is a natural transition into the next phase of Randy Brown's life. The question to get us there, you once told me when I turned 55, I was going to leave corporate America and do another phase in my life. You'd call that phase the giving back phase. How did you know you were ready to make that transition? And did you ever think, am I leaving money on the table? And part two of that question is, in the giving back phase of your life, did you ever consider being a consultant or a board member or staying in the business world, so to speak, before you go into college life?
I have just a goofy, wise ass answer about how did I know? I
Yeah.
knew because I was the chief HR officer at Anthem, and I knew what the compensation plans were and how they worked. So even helped design it. So I knew that if I stayed to 55, certain magic things happened for my financial future, like stock continued to vest that you had and things like that. So it wasn't just an arbitrary number; it was actually a number tied to the way our compensation system worked. But it did line up with financial planning, life planning, personal wealth management planning with a financial advisor. So there was that part. I mean, what I did want was I wanted to get to a point in my life where whatever I wanted to do after that, it wasn't because of the money, that I had enough money to live the life that I wanted to live for the rest of my life, that I wouldn't have to work again for money. I could choose to, but I wouldn't have to. So that was kind of the financial part. The age part was really there's no guarantee on how long you're going to live. So if that goal was not to be met until I was 65 or 70, which is fine, you may or may not live that long. So I wanted to give myself enough runway that I would have a sizable amount of time, hopefully, God willing, and all that stuff, that I'd have some time to play out that new chapter. So the 55 was a magic of practical financial reality and wanting to have enough years left in the tank to play it all out. And that's how it came together for me.
Awesome. So you started Butler and you become an executive career coach and mentor, which is where you and I connected in, I think 2013 or 2014 is I was an MBA student and you were, you mentioned sometimes luck in life and career is luck. And, I consider one of the luckiest days of my career is the day that we randomly got assigned as Randy Brown's going to be your executive career mentor. And I had no idea what that meant. And you and I shook hands and met in a conference room. And I think similar to this conversation, we kind of skipped the small talk and got right into it. And, you know, 10 or 11 years later, here we are.
Yeah, I consider that a pretty lucky day too, Kory, because hopefully I didn't show it at the time, but I was cutting my teeth on you. You were one of the first I had, right? So I had to prove that I could do this new thing. And so I appreciate the grace you gave me to stumble through it a little bit. But I had two roles at the time. My goal when I started was I wanted to work with young people, and I didn't answer one part of your prior question. That is, that I want to keep working for money. I started out doing executive coaching with executives for a little bit, and I mean, I took one client on, and like 3 months into it, I thought, "What the heck? This is exact." I'm trying to replicate my corporate prestige and or whatever, an income. And I just thought I decided not to have to work for money. So I really pushed myself to say, what do I really want to do? And I really wanted to work with young people. And I had a good friend who told me that the age group I should work with were college kids. And I said, what about high school? And he knew me for like 30 years. And he said, no, college is right for you. They have to be old enough that you're not wiping their nose and, doing big, they have to want to be there. And generally, college kids kind of want to be there. And especially you, because I met you when you were an MBA student. And MBA students don't go to school at night unless they really want to be there. But yet, there's so much ahead of them that the opportunity to work with them to help you develop a game plan was so fun. And so, the whole notion of did I care about money? Not anymore because I didn't have to. Did that free me to do what I really wanted to do, which was work with young people who had all kinds of potential? Yes. And I also know this, you have to be honest with yourself about who you are. I did not want to work with remedial situations. I wanted to work with people who were good and wanted to be great. So there are, thankfully, there are people out there who, social workers and other people, they're the real heroes. They take on tough situations. I wanted to work with basically solid kids who were in college and wanted to figure out what's next. And that's how you and I got introduced in the MBA program. And the authenticity with which you met me and the eagerness to, be vulnerable and open and talk about real things really jazzed me too. And that's why we're still here, I think 11 years later, when we don't have to be just because we want to be.
That's amazing. And so, Randy, one of the first things that, I actually downloaded on my computer when we met, and I've had it on my desktop saved. I don't look at it as often as I wish I did, but it's been on my desktop for 10 years. And that's your meaningful mentorship 9 tips. And I think some of those, we don't have to get into the details on each one of them, but some of this will frame the next conversation, I think, is as a guiding principle of your philosophy in leadership and development of younger kids. The one that always struck me, and I say this to myself all the time, and I learned this from you, is curiosity over judgment. And can you speak about maybe what that is? And maybe in the context of business and leadership, what are the biggest risks to leaders who, rush to judgment over curiosity? And I guess the flip side to that question would be a lot of leaders would say, myself included, that I have a really good gut instinct and I have a really good feel. But how do you distinguish between gut instinct and intuition and feel versus judgment and staying curious?
Yeah, I think there's two ways, and I always smile because it's a principle that you have to keep in mind. I have to keep in mind no matter how old I get, because the world rewards us for being quick studies, right? The world rewards us for being sharp, and no one gets rewarded for being slow usually, right? There's a high incentive is to be quick and sharp and clever and fast and blah blah blah. But if you let's just take it into a business setting. If you acquire another company and you're sloppy and you don't do your due diligence, you will probably make a big mistake. You'll overpay, you'll buy the wrong company, whatever. There is a point at which getting curious about what you're acquiring can help you be smart about the price you pay and the company you buy. Take that into human behavior, right? We think we know somebody, and then there's a whole level of depth we have no idea about. It's that accountant who comes to work, he's not just an accountant. Who knows what his life is like? And so before you assign usually negative things, blame, laziness, ineptitude, whatever. Why is a person not showing up for a couple days? Before I rush to judgment and conclude why that is, get the facts, learn more, ask questions. Because when you take the time to dig and ask more questions, you'll find that you tend to get more valid info that helps you be wiser and show up the way you should. There's a lot of times I've made mistakes because I've assumed somebody was fill in the blank, usually with a negative word, and what I didn't do was I didn't take the time to figure out what was really going on. And I embarrassed myself, learned the hard way that, I was not, that I should have paused and just been a little more patient to get the full story. So it's a kind of watchword, whether it's in business or in human relations. It really works with spouses, by the way, right? When your spouse is gonna, you is really about to inflame you, right? Take a breath and pause and just be curious about why, maybe. And that curiosity can save you some negative things.
Yeah, the other one that's sort of tough in business, you have a list here, and if you don't mind, after this episode, as part of publishing this, I'd love to publish with your permission. Your 9 tips. It's helped me tremendously, and I think would help a lot of others. You have ones like genuinely care, and I think over the course of this conversation, you can see that you truly believe that. What about this? Is one a lot of leaders struggle, I think. Teach how to think versus what to think. And, why even the most experienced of leaders, I've seen it firsthand over and over again. They just want to tell you the right answer and they are not good teachers and coaches. And one of the things, you know, at every time I've had a fork in the road professionally, I've come to you. I don't think you've ever told me, Kory, I think you should do this, and you've always led me there with the right questions for me to ultimately make my own decisions. And, I'm just a small example of what you've done in your professional and developmental life. Why do leaders struggle with do it this way? This is what to think. Maybe, can you give your perspective on that one?
Yeah, I think it's because when you're in leadership, you're expected to know stuff, and and therefore you push yourself to constantly prove that you deserved the job you got because of your knowledge. And so it's like there's a natural tendency that makes you want to be the smart guy, the guy with the answers. And what you really learn, I think, the more you get into leadership is you make better decisions when you listen to more people. You get a lot of opinions. You don't try and be the answer man or the answer woman. And I think so you have to push past that. And then the other part is with working with students and working with people like you. I dishonor you if I try and tell you how to make choices in your life, right? I never tell even my 19, 20 year olds what they should do as a career. I help them think through the options and what they might enjoy and help them explore and get to the answers that are right for them. Because, God forbid, I don't know all the things that are going on in their lives, in their heads, their aspirations, their desires, but to help them be a thought partner and think it through and let them own it. I mean, the worst thing in the world I want is someone to tell me what to do. Why should I do that with other people? But the tendency when you're in a position of authority is to think that you should do that. Now, it doesn't mean you don't make decisions that have to be made by the leader. It doesn't mean you punt on things that are your responsibility to decide. When it comes to things that people need to decide, like their career direction, even how they're going to respond to performance feedback, right? You lay it out, and then it's up to them to decide how they're going to handle that information you shared with them. It respects people's right to decide who they want to be. And at the end of the day, if you let them choose it, they're more likely to stick with it. And so when people get to choose their direction, they own it more, they stay with it more. It's longer lasting and therefore more useful.
And I think a natural segue to that is into one of your 9 tips, which is embrace vulnerability. And you just said, you as the leader, you're supposed to be the one that makes the decision, but leaders who are the most vulnerable also are the ones who get people to follow them. And so I'll catch you off guard maybe a little bit with this question, but along the same lines of embracing vulnerability in your executive coaching days and college, what's something a student's taught you? What's something a student taught you that flipped your perspective?
I'll give you a couple that I learned early in my mentoring with undergrads, not MBA students. And that is that when students start college at 18, there's a lot of things they've never had to do before, and they're learning it. So if they blow off a meeting with you, it's not because they're disrespecting you, it's because they haven't learned time management yet. They don't keep a calendar. They don't do basic things that you're used to doing as an adult. And so I would get agitated when people, 18-year-olds wouldn't show up or do their thing. And then I learned, wait a minute, they're learning all that. My favorite line of all from an 18-year-old was he missed the bell from high school because the bell told him what to do next. And he realized that in college, there's no bell, right? You have to figure it all out yourself. And so I think the vulnerability of making up reasons why kids weren't doing things for me and not being patient with them and being accusatory early, I fell into that trap and I had to apologize. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you were just learning this thing. And then I think once I got that down, then the magic started to happen because it wasn't about what were kids doing for me or not doing for me or listening to me or not listening to me. It's how can I help them learn these new skills that they have to learn as a young adult and grow and become ready for the world. And it became a fun challenge to forgive a kid 3 times when they missed a meeting, and the connection that forms when you don't pound a kid into the ground when they mess up and you just acknowledge that. I learned that the real magic in the relationship can happen when you're forgiving and understanding. And that first point you made, caring. I mean, none of it matters unless you genuinely care. I'll be quick here. I make my students I start working with as freshmen 2 promises as their career mentor. Number one is I'll never give up on you, even when you give up on yourself, and I'll always have your back. So what I don't promise is a job, which is what they think I'm there to help them get. And 99% is our placement rate. So they get a job. But the thing that I promise them that I can give them is unconditional support.
Randy took the words out of my mouth. I remember I could see it in my head. We're sitting in a conference room in the Butler building, and you said those two things to me. I'll always have your back and I'll never give up. And I just want you to know, I haven't told you this, but I say that to my 3-year-old daughter, Polly, all the time, that I'll always have your back and I'll never give up. And I think that just speaks to, it's one thing to say unconditional love and empathy, but not that we're not firm, and both my leadership style in business and as a parent, it's supportive, but it's firm. You can't be a pushover and a nice guy. You can be nice, but you can't get walked over. And, I think letting her know if I'm being hard on you, it's because I love you, but I'm going to be firm, but I'm always going to support you. And there's nothing you're going to do that says you're a failure. I'm disowning you. And it's the same thing in business, the way I try to lead. So those two things have stuck with me for a long time, Randy.
Yeah, I appreciate hearing that, Corey. And when you want to make a point, you can take leadership and parenting and make all kinds of great analogies I know you're learning. But I said, part of love is helping your kids learn things they need to learn. And so if you let your kids eat with their hands all their life and never force them to use utensils, they'd be 16 and eating with their hands, and that would be a bad look. At some point you have to force them to do things that they may not want to do. But it's for their own good, and that's a form of having their back, even though they may not see it at the time. Those kids who miss meetings with me in college, first three, I'll give them a break. But at some point, we sit down and say, if you blow off an interview with an employer, you're not going to get the job, right? So, it's all designed to get them ultimately where you need them to be. But if they don't sense that it's because you care about them, whether they're your kids or your students or your employees, it's gonna not gonna resonate. It's gonna be hollow.
Absolutely. Do you ever consider the irony, Randy, that you go from leading a Fortune 50 company with 45,000 people at such a high level? You're in charge of the people, but it's a mass group of people and a company. To now you're working one on one with, 18 to 20 something year olds. And that's a very different skill set to have. And do you ever consider that, it would almost be easier for you, financial incentives aside, it would almost be a more natural progression for you to coach and consult, CEOs of large companies during acquisitions and transformations, but you choose to, mentor one on one, the underdeveloped 18-year-old that hasn't even started in the professional world yet.
Yeah, I consider that a lot. In fact, most of my colleagues at Anthem, when we would get together afterward, they would be doing all those things you said. And then they would look at me and they'd find out what I'm doing. And I said, guys, I'm playing small ball. I mean, I went to do this thing because I wanted to do it. And it's a gut check. You have to be comfortable in your own skin, and you have to not let what do we call it, the trappings of career and status get in the way of what you really want. And so it's very freeing when you let yourself go there. But someone said you went from who's who to who's he, right? And it's true. But I guarantee you this, I didn't think I'd be 67 years old and going to twice as many weddings every year as funerals. And this year I got to perform a wedding for one of my former students. So there are joys in life tied to relationships with the next generation that really jazz me. And that is what jazzes me. And the guy who wants to coach CEOs, if that's what jazzes them, I hope they're doing it when they're 67, because you get to my age in life, and if you're not doing the things that really matter to you, tick tick tick, what are you waiting for? And so the more I can do what feeds me and not worry about what anybody thinks about it, the better I found that I am.
Well, Randy, I have a couple more questions, and then I like to end it with some rapid fire that you'll kind of shoot from the hip, and we'll have some fun.
Okay.
But I think what you're talking about, and one I just want to acknowledge something that's overlooked. I think the impact and influence that you can have on a one-to-one relationship, like you and I, sometimes even though you're only impacting that one person, you're having far greater impact in that one-to-one relationship than maybe you do managing 50,000 people. So, I know you're calling it small ball, but as someone who can vouch for it, and I know our mutual friend Ryan Alsman would say the exact same thing to me, that you've made tremendous impact in our lives, and hundreds, or if not thousands at this point, of Butler University students' lives. So you might call it small ball, but it's the World Series to us.
You're kind and very generous, which is one of the reasons I like working with you, Corey, and with Ryan. And it's not work anymore. It's having a relationship. We're friends now. And I think don't ever underestimate the love that you get back for this kind of work. If you do it right, people know that as one student said to me last week, I like having you in my corner. Someone says that acknowledges that yes, you're in their corner. That's the foundation of all kinds of wonderful lifelong relationships. So, to get to age into a work where you're always going to be around young, vibrant people who are growing, that's exciting. That's exciting to be part of. And you have honored me by just choosing to stay connected, even though we don't have to be anymore. And I'm loving the hell out of it.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about your latest venture and impact? Is Money Strong at Butler, and what is the gap you saw in the market, and what was the need to start the Money Strong, or co-create the Money Strong program at Butler?
Um, I remember exactly when I thought something needed to be done. It was 2017. One of my students just got his full time job. This was an undergraduate, and we went to Chatham Tap on Butler's campus. He was 21 to celebrate. And so we're having a beer and we're talking about his great success. And he says, "Can I talk to you about something else?" And I said, "Sure. What is it?" And he said, "I've got $100,000 in student loan debt, and there's nights I can't sleep. And I don't know what to do about that." And I thought, whoa, Butler's a great place. I did everything not to swallow my tongue and, gasp because I didn't want to make it worse. But I said, Craig, let me go find some resources for you because Butler's a great place. And I know there's people who can help you with that. I looked and looked and looked. And what I learned was colleges are really good at helping you get loans and pay for your education through financial aid. They're horrible about preparing you for the realities of life after, paying those loans back, buying a house, saving, all that stuff. Personal finance, somehow universities think that's been below them, and as a result, they'll teach you all kinds of fancy finance, but leave that out. And so I think I tapped into this right when other colleges were starting to get it too. And I just happened to be the one who said at Butler, let's begin our journey. And I partnered with the chair of the finance department, he's a young hip professor who looks cool and is cool. And Brian and I partnered up and said, let's do something about this at Butler. And so we created a program for financial literacy for undergraduates to help them learn, about money, how it works, credit, not just paying back student loans, but establishing credit, negotiating your salary at work, learning how to set aside money for the future, boring stuff that adults, have to pay attention to, like health insurance and things like that, but getting kids ready for that in a way that's engaging to them. Oops, excuse me. It can be we had to find a way to make it fun and interesting and enjoyable. So we created this program called Money Strong, and we do large group talks that are fun. They get extra credit for coming to, and we started packing a 202 seat room. We had our average attendance was 204 because we made the topics interesting and fun and light. And so bottom line, we have been on a mission to um, help kids at Butler, all colleges, learn about money so that when they launch into life, it won't be as intimidating to them as it was before we created this program. And Butler's been wonderful. They've just let us do all this fun stuff. And I'll just give you one thing where it's really useful now. The most recent thing that happened just this month, there's a new thing in college sports called NIL, where college athletes are getting NIL money to play. And these are sums of money that some of these kids have never seen. So this is the opposite problem of my kid with the $100,000 in loans. This is, I'm coming into money. And guess what? There's a whole bunch of people out there that want to take advantage of these kids. And so what we're doing is we're creating a network of trusted resources that can give them investment advice, wealth management advice, and tax advice for a discount. And they're Butler alums and they're trusted resources that now they could tap into and use so that, the sharks that want to take advantage of them aren't going to be there. So there's lots of forms that this thing is taking on, but it's all driven around helping kids get ready for the realities of life as an adult financially.
It's been phenomenal, and I've been watching from afar on LinkedIn, and I think it speaks volumes to it, Randy. That back to what you said about when you show someone they care, then they'll listen to you. And I've seen the pictures of packed auditoriums for people to come listen about money. And these are college kids. And so I think you're having a real impact, and I hope you keep going with it. And, if me and my network can be of support in any way,
Love
I
it.
love what you're doing. And I think that might end up when you look back, Randy, and 10 years from now when it's all said and done, or wherever you're at in your career with Butler. I mean, I think Money Strong might be, one of the most powerful legacies that you leave.
I hope so. It's certainly been an adventure and it's been fun. And I will tell you, just as for a laugh, it's not all that we're so engaging. We bribe them. We've got the university to give them certain requirement credits that get met if they attend one of our talks. So then when we get them there, we got to entertain them and educate them so that they come back. But we put in place incentives to show up, and then we got to be good at what we do. But I also want to talk about you and thank you, because one of the things that I've done, not necessarily on finance, but on more career is, how many times have I plugged somebody into you to say, will you talk to this student I'm mentoring now and be a resource to them? Because one of the things I know that's a limit about me, and it's in the 9 tips, is don't try and be everything to everybody. Realize when someone else is better able to help a person you're trying to help. And so there's oftentimes when people in their careers are considering a career that I'm not in, but that one of my graduated students is in, and the willingness of you and other graduated students I've worked with, 300 of you out there now that are willing to talk to my current students and help them. Man, when someone in their 20s and early 30s talks to the students about, career, it's way different than me, and it's really powerful. So thank you for that as well.
Absolutely. It's the least we can do. And yeah, I know you know it well, but when I was coming up in my career at corporate America at Cardinal, I had a couple of people that did that for me. And so I've never forgotten that. And any chance I got, I'm always open to doing that. So continue sending them my way.
I appreciate that. And sometimes they intersect. I had lunch with a graduate yesterday who graduate. He's 27. He's now on the Dean's Advisory Council at Butler, and a new guy joined the council who's a lawyer. And Vinny was the guy. He's a financial advisor. And when Nolan came on the committee, he said to Nolan, "Hey, I met you. Didn't Randy Brown introduce you to me when I was considering law school?" And yeah. And, yeah, I didn't go to law school. And he said, "Yeah, I went to law school, became a lawyer, and I don't practice it now." So they had a good laugh about like the journey that they had and how it all came back around. Life has connections have a funny way of coming back again in ways we can't always predict.
Totally. So Randy, we'll be in the home stretch here. We'll wrap this up with a couple rapid fire questions and, you know, you take it wherever your gut instinct says.
Okay.
Best career advice you ever got?
Don't try and prove why you got the job. A guy told me that when I was 33 and I beat out a guy who was 46 to get the job. And he said, "You earned it. It's an upset. You got it. Don't spend the first month trying to prove why you got it. Just do the job."
What do you feel more, the joy or sweetness of winning or the pain or sting of losing?
I think the sting of losing. And you could say, well, you're a Cleveland Browns fan. How can that be? Aren't you numb by now? I think it's because, yeah, football, maybe it's the opposite. It's the joy of winning. I feel more with the Browns. But in life, I think I've been blessed more often than not. And therefore, I think as a result, I've counted so many of my blessings that I enjoy them so much. I don't want to ever take them for granted. But when I really screw up and have a self induced loss, I feel the pain of that, I think, a little deeper.
I'm the same way. What's a leadership belief? Leadership ideally, but any belief that you hold that most would push back on or be surprised by?
Wow, that's a really good question. Well, I once, because I tend to be somewhat positive and gregarious, I once was asked, what's the biggest misconception people have about you? And I told them that I was just a nice guy. And I said, I'm a nice guy, but I can do hard things and I like to achieve at a high level. So maybe that the misconception that he's just such a nice guy, he sends love and mentors, and now I like to achieve and I like to win too.
Absolutely. Final piece of wisdom for the audience or advice out there.
Wow, just um say yes to life, say yes to the opportunities, and don't deny who you really are. Don't let the world tell you who you should be. Forge your plan, learn from your mistakes, get back on your horse and just keep going. And it's a journey. If you had told me when I was 25 what I was going to do when I was 45, and you told me at 45 I was going to be doing this, I would have said, you're nuts. I don't know what you're talking about. Just be open to how life unfolds, but keep doing it by knowing who you are, what matters to you, and keep your priorities straight. And on you go. And I think life will be pretty good. And hang around inspiring young people who do podcasts, because that can make life kind of fun too.
All right, Randy, the final question's always the same. What is the kindest thing that anyone's ever done for you?
Man, wow. There's so many kind things. that people have done for me. It's really hard to pick one. I would say the kindest thing that someone ever did for me was probably my wife, who, when she knew it was time for us to get married and I was still, deciding whether I was ready to jump in, she didn't give up on me because she knew I just need it was something I had to get to and own, and she didn't. God forbid if she had just said, "You don't know what you want. I'm ready to move on." So she hung in there with me, and the best decision I ever made was marrying Libby Brown, and she's changed my life. So I think her kindness in not giving up on me, even though she knew that we were meant to be before I did, was probably the greatest gift I ever got.
Your two things that you tell all your new students, that's what she used on you. And I'll never give up
She
on you.
never gave up on me, right? And she had my back. Yep, exactly. So I think that's great. And so,
Randy,
yeah,
this
that would be it.
Randy, this has been great. I know we've been on for an hour. I just wanted to tell you personally that, when I look back, I was talking to Blair about having you on the other day, and, she reminded me, it's like if I look back over the last 10 years or so professionally and even in life in general, anytime there was a fork in the road or I had a difficult decision, I called you. You always took the call. You always heard me out. You always, shared such wisdom, which is so generous. And I just want to let you know that really appreciate it. Your opinion is one of the most that I put the most stock in. So, and I know I'm not the only one of your students that feels that way. So it's you continue being an inspiration, and I really appreciate it. And I
Well,
and maybe on a lighter note, Randy, I've never told you this, but I've once described you as Yoda in a Cleveland Browns jersey. I was like,
I am kind of short.
well, you can say Yoda is so wise. Why would he be a Cleveland Browns fan?
Yeah. There are many things I will take to my grave that have to do with being a Browns fan, and one of them is the humor that goes with it, the endless humor and amazement that people have when they find that I haven't given up on them. But we'll see where it takes me. And Kory, thank you again. This is a lot. I knew this would be a ton of fun. We when we talked about doing this, I immediately said sure because I knew it would be delightful, fun, deep, and just a great mix of, Kory Cutler. And I always love being around you. And I'm loving our friendship and that it has evolved to this. All right, take care, friend.